Hello, Coffee Chat friend. Today I want to do a little bit of a ramble about a few different things. One is the word monism. Now, I was having a chat last night with kids about differences between theism, deism, and then, of course, even polytheism, these sorts of things, and also monism. Now, monism is sort of a difference between, is kind of the opposite of pluralism or dualism or multiple isms, where there is, creator, man and nature. There's like a separation of some sort, whereas monism it's mono is one, right? Everything's one. And this was in reference to a couple of videos I'd watched with this guy, Aaron Ra, I think he calls himself on the internet. And you can look it up. There was this one I watched the other day. It was called the seventh, what do you call it? The seventh foundational falsehood of creation. Creationism or creation, not sure. Anyways, he talks about how there's this debate that goes on that there has to be an overriding, almost like a separate parallel universe originated, if you will, creator, which creates creation. And therefore this big debate. Of course, no evidence of any of that sort of thing. But one of the arguments, the falsehood, if you will, from a purely reasoned standpoint, that this could be so, the reason it's the falsehood is that you can't have complexity and creation, or complexity in diversity and creation and so on, without some sort of a supreme intelligence. Now, I thought about this afterwards. He didn't address it in there or anything, but I just thought about it afterwards, and about how this must be why it is that, because of these falsehoods in our logic that has been part of humanity for so long, that we have this concept that we must have governing authority figures. Otherwise, there would be chaos. In other words, you cannot have order unless you have supreme authority. And apparently, see, people couldn't be faulted for thinking that way hundreds of years ago, or maybe even 100 years ago, because there was no evidence otherwise. So it was one or the other, so we'll take one that we're used to. We'll take the barbarity of having people beat us up to make sure that we're orderly, rather than considering the options. And of course, the deity concept, or the theity concept, is the same thing. It's like this higher authority. Without this higher authority, we cannot have morality, we cannot have order, we cannot have creation the way it is. But it's been proven now that creation in computer models and in observing fossil studies, paleontology, what have you, that in fact order can come from chaos. I'm not going to attempt to explain why, because I'm not skilled enough at that. But if you want to have a look at what this guy was talking about, just type into YouTube, seventh foundational falsehood of creation, and just have a listen, an open mind, and see what you think. And how this relates to government is the concept of we must have an overriding godly government to control the otherwise chaos, to keep everything in order. The other side of it is grassroots movements, like what began with probably the Tea Party movement, I would guess, until it became political. The grassroots I'm talking about. Same with the Reform Party movement up in so-called Canada, until it became corrupted by politicians. And in fact, now you have the supreme dictator sitting in Ottawa, who was part of the Reform Party movement. So these things always get perverted, because of our millions of years of subconscious belief that we must have a higher authority, otherwise we're in chaos. But evolutionary science, or the evidence in evolution doesn't prove that this is necessary. In fact, the opposite is proved, which is that the very basis of life mutates a little bit until it finds, and then what is advantageous survives. I would say, translating that into a societal construct and a way that we can get along, this would explain why pure free markets are much more just and much more functional than any authoritarian, coercive style of management injustice. Because if something doesn't work, people just abandon it because it costs them. There's an immediate cost. You can't defer costs by, screwing up and then just, oh well, we screwed up, so we'll go steal this guy's gold with our guns, and then we'll make it better. The market system doesn't work that way, a pure market system. I'm not talking about some phony fascist capitalistic system that people call the free market or the market, which is what is most commonly seen today. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a free market of you and I, you wanting my pen and I wanting your dollar bill, and we make a voluntary agreement to exchange, or just the exchange of ideas. That's also a free market. I'm talking about a free market. When there is a free market and societies that get closer to that, there's more advancement. Every time they get closer to that, there is a renaissance. You strip away the controlling top-down godly character called imposed governance system, which is basically imposed by the people believing it, but nevertheless seeing it legitimate. Whenever you remove that or remove part of it and allow freedom to flourish, provided that there is also support of a class of people, if you will, who are philosophical and scientific minded and evolved in that way large enough, as happened in Europe, as happened in early America, then you have a real advancement. You have the allowance of industrial revolutions, revolutions in thought, revolutions in philosophy, revolutions in human rights, if you will, like the disposal of concepts like overt slavery, like women being second-class individuals. These sorts of things can come about when you have a free market of ideas, but that is from the ground up. A number of people eventually decide we don't need to believe in this us versus them mentality of gods, whether they are constructed gods or crowned human beings as gods, as in political characters and so on. Once we say we don't need all of that, we don't need this pluralistic society, we can all be equal, we can all be one as one even playing field, if you will, and have a freedom of exchange, then actually we create order out of that. And some of the greatest order that ever came about has come about because of that, because of this freedom it created. In early United States is the example of the greatest freedom that ever existed. Now, of course, it's perverted now. It's completely perverted to the point where it became so prosperous that the money changers and the control freaks and everything and the lawyers slipped back in, and it's in disarray again. But at least it stands as a historical example of how, just like the concept that evolution or the development of life forms can come from seemingly no life to life, or at least, maybe not no life to life, but at least very simple forms of life, with single cells, can eventually adapt and adapt and adapt from the bottom up and grow into very complex and orderly ecosystems, if you will. Just like that, and though yes, there is a lot of injury and trial and error in the process, just like that, we can have grassroots of voluntary individuals without this pluralism of hierarchy, and we can create a much more evolved, civilized society of people who volunteer to get along and have a free market exchange of whatever it is we want to voluntarily exchange. So yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I know maybe I didn't do the greatest job of explaining what I wanted to talk about. Nevertheless, it's a good example of how when people say things can't be done, we are little by little finding out that things can be done, and the record of history can prove it to be the case. Just like the concept of how for millions of years we thought that life had to, because it's so complex, it had to be created by a deity on the moment, completely developed in adult form. Whereas now we're seeing fossil record and so on, which shows a path of increased complexity and divergent and dying off of ineffective creatures, and then a lineage of ones that are more successful, and they diverge into more successful creatures and so on. We see this trial and error, and that's the same as a market system. I mean, if we are exchanging ideas or crafts or whatever it is, and what we're doing is not working, then we improve it based on a trial and error, because we're not getting the feedback that we want, we're not getting the results that we want, so we change it a little bit and keep on changing it. It's the same over millions of years when the grassroots of life is being developed. If a certain development is not working because the animal is not getting the food that it needs or whatever, it might develop by a slight adaptation, it'll create a little bit longer limb, which could reach a little bit deeper to get its food, and those ones that could became stronger, and they're the ones that got the mates, and they're the ones that reproduced, and because that gene was more common and so on. I'm not a scientist or anything, I'm just going by what I understand, and therefore it worked better. It just worked better for them as a feedback, right? It worked better for it, so there was more of those that came into being. And it's the same with us, if we're even in our friendships, if we realize that a certain behavior is more adaptive to be attractive to people, then we're going to have more friends, right? And or our whatever it is that we're selling is going to be sold more. These sort of things. So that's why the free market is so much more effective than a top-down entity, a godly entity called God or government or whatever you want to call it, telling us you have to do this or you have to do that. Even though it doesn't necessarily work, you just have to do it because that's the rule. In a bottom-up, lowest common denominator is what's really going to adapt things. And I say that is what happens anyway, because even that concept of the higher authority is only held in place by the bottom-up. At the moment that we can just get rid of that, if it doesn't have any rational connection to what we're doing, then we can just deal with one-on-one grassroots up, and we will grow a more voluntaristic, civil, equal, loving means connection, right? Monistic type of interaction and an evolution of our human life. And this to me is directly related to improving the quality of our life experience, because it's just more effective. And anything that can be more effective and more peaceful and more loving and more equality based, the more friendship we're going to have, the more once again equality we're going to have, the more, and of course the more happiness we're going to have, the more connection we're going to have. It's not going to be somebody telling us what to do, so we cannot have a proper relationship with that. When we're on an equal basis with everyone as much as possible, there can be more of a genuine friendship there. And to me, there's nothing more important in terms of the quality of our life than the quality of our relationships, or in terms of affecting the inside. Our quality of life experience is affected, I don't think, any more than than anything except the quality of connection we have with others, because it's like a greater sense of self in a way, right? Anyway, great chat. I know it was a little bit deep today, but once again, I'm just standing by the river here. It runs a bit fast right along here. I wish I could have showed you, but it's getting a bit dark. There was an eagle flew right over just when I was starting, and there was a duck went floating down the river, bouncing along the little waves there. It was kind of cool. Anyways, talk to you later. My name is Steve, and I look forward to chatting you again. Bye-bye.